Well, what's going on in Wisconsin is what's really going on in most of the upper Midwest. And that is that while we haven't necessarily hit quite as high unemployment rates as some other parts of the country, the upper Midwest has suffered from really severe deindustrialization. We've lost a lot of our best jobs in states like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. And so there's a great deal of discomfort, and that has ricocheted hard against the Democrats. There's simply no question that President Obama came to Milwaukee on Monday, Labor Day, because he thinks that this is really one of the places where the 2010 election cycle will be decided. Obama was in Milwaukee just 2 weeks ago, so he's kind of making this a regular stop. The problem, or the great challenge, is, though, that what people are really concerned about is that unemployment rate and frankly, the deindustrialization. And very little of what President Obama said yesterday is necessarily going to inspire quick confidence about bringing those unemployment numbers down.
Mm-hmm. Talk about the real unemployment numbers. I mean, when they talk about 9.6%, when you're talking about young people, we're talking in the range of, what, 35%. Communities of color and young people, put that together, we're talking over 50%.
Yeah, it's the unemployment figures that come out at the beginning of every month are a complete fantasy. They were restructured several decades ago to make presidents look better. But the reality is that the Department of Labor does bring out a figure where it includes people who have given up on looking for work, and that's literally millions and millions of people, as well as people who are severely underemployed. Those are folks who, they may work a couple hours a week, maybe 10 hours a week, but they don't begin to have the level of employment that would allow them to support their families or have any kind of security. When you add those numbers in, nationwide, the United States has roughly a 17% unemployment rate. Now, I want to underline that. 17%. That's 1 in 6 Americans unemployed. Now, when you take that into your inner cities, into some rural areas, and also when you look at people under 30, those numbers begin to skyrocket. And the really scary thing, Amy, is that in many communities, including the community where Barack Obama was speaking yesterday, Milwaukee, you have some areas of the city, some areas of the metro, where people have been unemployed at those levels, not just for the last 2 years, but in some cases, decades of systemic high unemployment, going well into the double digits. So what we're really seeing here is a situation where, and it's not all Barack Obama's fault, certainly, but we're seeing a situation where this president is frankly facing the long-term concern about a number of patterns in this country that have contributed to unemployment. First off, of course, deindustrialization. We're literally shutting factories at a very steady rate in this country. But second, and I think perhaps just as important, we haven't begun to think about allowing our older workers to retire at a reasonable time. In most countries in the world, when you get to the mid to late 50s, you're starting to think about retirement. In the United States, our Social Security system is set up basically to force people to work well into their 60s. Now there's talk about even putting the retirement age higher. Now, what that does is force older workers to stay on jobs, and that creates fewer and fewer openings, especially in hard times, for young workers to start their employment. And so we've got a lot of problems in this country that haven't been addressed. Barack Obama yesterday talked about a few things that certainly sound good, but it doesn't begin to get to the core of these long-term unemployment issues.
You wrote a piece, John, called "Obama Should Borrow a Page from FDR this Labor Day." What should he do?
Look, the thing that FDR did, interestingly enough, in the state of Wisconsin 2 years into his presidency, on an almost exactly parallel date, was to give one of the great speeches of his presidency. And what he said was, look, we're 2 years into a new presidency. Times are hard. Things have not improved as quickly as folks want to. But let me explain to you why that is. And then FDR laid out basically a history lesson in which he said there has always been a struggle between a privileged few and the great mass of Americans. The 1932 election, Roosevelt said, was the point at which the great mass of Americans demanded change. But the privileged few were going to fight very, very hard. And he really laid out an us-against-them struggle. He made it very, very clear that people had to choose which side they were on. It was a terrific speech, and it's the sort of speech, in my mind, that Obama needs to give. He needs to make it clear not just that Republicans are saying no for some sort of partisan reason, but that there is a long-term history of elites in this country saying no to changes that might make for a more equitable economy and frankly, that might address issues like long-term unemployment. I don't think President Obama did that yesterday, and to my mind, that was a missed opportunity.
John Nichols, tell us who Ron Johnson is, the Republican opponent to Russ Feingold. His background, the Times quoted him talking recently about Social Security as a Ponzi scheme.
Yes, Ron Johnson is a very, very wealthy man who didn't make all of his money in business. He frankly made it by good family ties. But he's wealthy enough to fund a U.S. Senate campaign. And when the Republicans were looking for an opponent to Russ Feingold, they basically said, look, we're advertising for somebody who will pay for their own campaign. Ron Johnson has been doing that to the tune of literally millions of dollars. He basically owns the television airwaves in Wisconsin. Now, the truth of the matter is he has no electoral experience. That's certainly not a requirement. Some very, very good people have come up without electoral experience. But he also seems to have extremely limited experience thinking about core issues in the country. He gave a talk the other day in which he essentially said free trade was a great thing and that U.S. companies that were relocating their business to other countries were probably doing a smart thing, that they were basically making choices that made sense from a business standpoint. So he's basically running for the U.S. Senate as somebody giving a business lecture, on a Thursday morning to a bunch of entrepreneurs, rather than as as somebody who's seriously talking about the core problems. But the reality is that we live in a political system where if you have the money to buy an immense amount of messaging, you can be very viable. At the same time, Russ Feingold has been a real maverick politically, and so he's broken with the Democratic Party at an awfully lot of turns. And as a result, he's never established the sort of kind of careful politician model that might, in some cases, insulate against this. So it's going to be a wild and very fascinating race where you see kind of the worst of, to my mind, big money politics against an old school maverick who's trying to fight on a lot of ideas. I think it's going to be a fascinating race, and it will be close because less to do with Feingold and Johnson than with the reality that Wisconsin, like a lot of states in the upper Midwest, is just very, very scared, frightened, if you will, about where the economy's at and where it's going. And that often creates an opportunity for the kind of old saw of a businessman coming along saying he wants to run the federal government like a business.
So you have Russ Feingold, who opposed the president's decision to expand the war in Afghanistan, voted against bailing out financial institutions in 2008, opposed Wall Street regulation this year, saying the restrictions didn't go far enough, did not show up at President Obama's Racine, Wisconsin speech, and had this very serious quote where he said, at the start of this process, I made clear that I had a simple test for financial reform. Will it stop another financial meltdown? He said, this bill fails that test. I won't support legislation that fails to protect the people of Wisconsin from the pain of another economic disaster. And he said, I don't need to be lectured about this issue by people who supported repeal of Glass-Steagall, which paved the way for this terrible recession. And he didn't show up yesterday at President Obama's Milwaukee speech, though he was at his own in Janesville.
Well, look, the reality about Russ Feingold is that he's pretty much always gone his own way, be the president a Republican or a Democrat. It's interesting to me that people are making a big deal about this. In fact, it is Feingold's style. And he was both in Janesville and I think Kenosha, Wisconsin. Now, what's significant about that is both of the cities where Feingold was yesterday are cities where auto plants have closed pretty much during Barack Obama's presidency. And one of the things that Russ Feingold has talked about since the beginning of his Senate career is a bad trade policy in this country, the lack of a serious industrial policy in this country, and a real failure of working people. And I think that the significant thing is that he spent Labor Day in communities that are hurting because the economic policies of this country have not been very good to working people. It's also notable that this week he'll be, while he couldn't make it to Milwaukee with the president, he'll make it to the annual progressive gathering in Wisconsin, Fighting Bob Fest, where at least 10,000 people will gather with Jim Hightower and others to say, look, Barack Obama may be a nice guy, but we really do need fundamental progressive reform of our economy. I think that Feingold believes that, and so I'm not sure that he wants to bang on the president, but I also am not sure that he's particularly in agreement with the president on a host of issues.
John Nichols, I want to thank you for being with us. He's the correspondent for The Nation magazine, maintains the blog The Beat at thenation.com, speaking to us from Madison, Wisconsin. This is Democracy Now! Today is publishing day for Robert Scheer. His book, The Great American Stick-Up, is out. We'll talk to him in a minute.
Step by step, the longest march can be won. Many stones can form an arch.